Welcome to another edition of EJH British Cars. Today we're going to start putting the transmission back together, which is probably actually going to take a couple of days, but through the magic of editing, it'll all be one video. So let's get started. Well, unfortunately, we lost the clip that I wanted to show you about doing this input shaft, but this is putting the bearing separator onto the old bearing and setting it up and get it ready to put into the press to press it off. So you can see you got it between the bearing and the input gear. This is setting up in the press. You want to make sure that you're pressing on the inner part of the bearing. That's why these bearing splitters are really nice, because they're very thin right at the very edge. So we got it centered up, and we're going to lower the press down, and we'll push, and it just came off pretty easy, so it was not that big a deal. Also, there's a circlip that we took off first. So we've got the old one apart. I've placed the new bearing and onto the input shaft, and there's also like a washer in between that just fell down, and that's the I think it's a oil separator as much as anything. So set it into the press, making sure that we're pressing on the inner part of the bearing race. There's a socket on top just as a spacer so it'll fit in the press better, and we're coming down, and we're just going to get this nicely centered, get it all pretty, and just go ahead and push. This actually pushed on pretty easily. No troubles whatsoever. All right, well, we've got the shim in, and the ring is facing towards the clutch side. I'll go ahead and push that in. Nice and easy. And make sure when you set up your push blocks that they push on the center of the bearing and not the outer edge. Otherwise, you can really muck up a bearing. If you press here, it pushes the force through the roller bearings, and that's not a good thing. They're not really designed to take side load like that. Okay. And that was a spacer, just to make the press reach. And there it is. And there it is back in. And you can tell this is closed all the way. You can see how close those are. Those are 3/16 or so apart. So that's closed all the way. I had to take it back to the press and give it another little push. It was just hanging up a couple of thousandths. Anyway, so that's in there. And so now we want to pull this bearing out of here. So this is a Harbor Freight tool. It's Pittsburgh 95987, and I bought this several years ago, so I assume they still sell it. I'll probably check later when I'm sitting at the computer. But it's for pulling things out of blind holes. So it's kind of like a reverse collet. So these fingers open as you drive this in, and they are tapered. They've got a lip at the edge. There are 4 different sizes. Just got to find the one that fits best. Which would be the one that I had. Put it in. The only big thing is you got to have enough room for this to get back past the back side of the bearing. And see if we can't find a wrench that'll fit that. 3/4. And that's in there pretty well now. And then it has a slide hammer, which just threads onto the back edge. Like so. I'm probably going to have to put this in the vise, but we'll give it a shot just like this.
Well, it's coming out. You can see right there, that edge is out about 1/4 of an inch. You can hear the tone changing. And there it is. Just as simple as that. So you can see how it attached to the bearing. Okay, so here's the new bearing, and I sized it up to the old one to make sure it was the right size, and it is. So I'm going to do this in the press. We're going to put this in just the same way we did before. This will go into the end, lined up on the hole, like that. And I've got this socket that's the size of the bearing. Going to use that to push it down, and we only push it down so it's flush with that top edge, which means there'll be a gap behind it, which is good. So we want the pilot shaft supported as far out as we can, or the main shaft, and we want to make sure there's room behind it so the next person who has to change this can. So I'm not going to bother to film in the press because I just showed you that, so I figure you can figure it out if I showed you. So I'll show you it when it's done. Alright, so we got the new bearing pushed in to the end of the input shaft, and then we just need to put this outer bearing circlip on. Now I guess we just go for the old-fashioned way. Get it started. There we go. Work it around its groove and it's snapped in. There you go, and there's the new bearing. So, input shaft rebuilt. So we started. So it is killer hot out here today, so I think I'm going to call that a wrap for the day. And it's supposed to be cooler tomorrow. And we will start in on the main shaft. I'm going to start on the main shaft now. So your best bet is to grab a piece of steel bar that's smaller than the diameter of the shaft, because we're going to use this to stack all these components on, because you need to keep them in the same order they're in, and you don't want to turn them around or anything. So we'll start. These are the pieces that got put on from yesterday. So that's the circlip, the spacer. This is the old bearing. That's the other spacer. Now, start getting into the real parts. So this is the gear cluster. This has another spacer that was in there, and it has this central bushing that goes in there. And as long as those aren't buggered up, you can reuse those. And it's a synchronizer ring. And then this is the other half of the synchro hub. This is the first, second, reverse, and that's why it has teeth on the outside. And we have another synchronizer ring. And then we get to here, other side. So let's push these down our shaft. There's another, we're going to stack these. There's another synchro hub, another synchronizer, and there is the other circlip. Now you can use a couple of screwdrivers to get that out, but it is a bugger. And you should not reuse it. Especially if you take it out with two small screwdrivers. They have replacement clips, so they're not very expensive, so don't muck around, because if that falls apart, you're going to take your transmission apart again. And believe me, I've seen people have to do that. So, according to the factory manual, there's a Churchill tool. Don't know what the number is, but is this. I bought these from TRF a long time ago, and this is circlip removal tool that'll go in, and these fingers go into the splines, get underneath, and then you can pull it out. And this is the installation tool. This will go on to the main shaft, and then you set the circlip. You definitely want to grease this cone, and then you drive it on with this. So like I said, I bought this years ago after trying to do this a couple of times by hand. It was not inexpensive, and actually I talked to Chuck Runyon about it. He was very disappointed. He spent a lot of money to make a few tools like that, and he thought probably not going to sell it to individual people, but he was hoping that the clubs would buy one to share, and he sold hardly any. I don't know how many he had made up or whether they still have them or not, but believe me, these things make life so much easier. So this has got a marking. It says hand scribed on here. It says S for Sam, 69, B for boy. So whether that's the TRF part number or not, I don't know. Anyway. So we'll set those over the splines, and you gotta knock it in. I have to tell you, it's been several years since I used this, so I'm kind of retraining myself here. So I'm going to spin this circlip so the corner doesn't dig into the corner of the splines. That's better. Bugger. So I just thought I'd give you a comparison. This is the ring we took out with the proper tool, and this is a new one. And look how much different the gap is on the end of that. So you can see why you cannot reuse these. I mean, I've seen guys talk about, squeezing these back up in a vise and everything, but these are too cheap to muck around with. So, that said, we've put our bits back onto the main shaft, and there's this one special washer. If you notice that it's got 3 tongues on it so it doesn't rotate. Also has a groove on one side, so the flat side goes towards the synchronizer hub, and the groove side goes towards where we're going to put the new circlip. So you can see how this fits over there, and we want to put a little grease on it. Not to go crazy, but you want it lubricated. You take the new circlip, place it on there. Put the shaft down on something firm. There's the circlip. Here's this piece. You just want to work it on. So it doesn't go easy, that's for sure. Certainly not easy on the hand. So let this gear fall down here. Alright. So that's it. So that circlip is now on the spline section. We just need to drive it home. You probably didn't hear it, but it clicked in. You can see it sitting in there. Alright, so when you put this together, this is the clutch end, this is the tail shaft, so it's like this. The first thing that goes in is a solid spacer, then the bronze center for this gear cluster, then the top hat bearing and this gear cluster, and then we get the special spacer that's got the 3 teeth. This spacer has 3 teeth that go into the grooves of the spline, and it's got a groove on one side and it's flat on the other, so the flat side goes in, and then you should see that the top of that special spacer is level with the bottom of the grooves in the splines. Then so I suppose if you were in a pinch and you were really sure that all these bushings were good, because that bronze top hat spacer, that they actually go to a steel one later on, because it's very common for the brim of the hat to fracture free. This one was in one piece. It's the first one I've taken apart in a long time that wasn't in 2 pieces. If you were not going to do that, then you would not have to take that spacer out, because you can get your new syncro on this end, no problem. And then you would just start reassembling all these bits. Now the other thing you want to think about is how good are my synchros, the springs, the detent springs. And these feel pretty good, but they do get beat up, and the kits don't come with new synchro springs anymore. It's just a spring and a ball bearing. But the old kits always had those, but they're just 1/4 inch ball bearings. There's nothing special about them. The hard part is if somebody's really beat on your transmission, the balls won't want to come out of the synchro hubs. And you also want to be really sure to test them. Just push them against something, because if you just push them, they're going to go like that, and there's 3 springs and 3 balls. They're going to go to the 3 wins if you just push. And if the transmission's really been beat on, you're not going to be able to get the balls out. I think you have to try to sort of get a tapered grinding wheel for your Dremel and try to push the tip in to push the ball down and grind in there a little bit, because the edges of the spines get tore up. Anyway, I digress. So we get that one in. So we put another new synchro in. We get another hard shim goes in. And we get another hub, another bronze insert bushing. Just look to make sure that that looks all right. That one goes on. There we go. Another spacer goes in there. And then you can't put the bearing on until this main shaft is back into the case. So I'm going to go clean the case up, and then we'll see if we can put that together. Well, this is the lay shaft cluster. and it has pressed in bearings here, and you replace these much the same way as we did with the input shaft. Use the puller, pull it out, and you can just tap the new ones home. So I don't think I'm going to change these ones. These are Torrington, which is a really good bearing. They look perfect, and they look better than the ones I sent to replace them with. That there are more bearings in the circle here, so that means there's more contact area. And this is what really gets beat up in this transmission, is that there's a lot of pressure here, particularly in first gear. It's trying to push the gear set down, and this is where the input shaft comes in. And here's the lay shaft. If that retainer clip that was broken in this one, if it moves, this slides back, and then it drops down. And then this isn't pushed as tight, and there have been some inferior quality shafts and stuff. You see they really get beat up here because the bearing rides on this shaft. There is no race for it to ride on. So, like I say, this shaft has a tiny bit of wear on it. I'll probably use one of the new ones, because I know I've got one of the Roadster factory ones from years ago. I bought several of them because they were better than the replacements that were floating around at the time. So there was problems with the hardening, and the alignment of this feed hole were different in a bunch of them for whatever reason. So here's the new one. You can see that these people are proud enough that they put their mark on it. B-A-S-T-U-C-K, Bastuck. And G38 TR6, 2242. And it's well machined. This looks like a really nice piece. Anyway, so we're going to use that. And we've got new thrust bearings. Clean the case out. Get the old gunky oil out of there. So I'm going to get this ready, and then we'll put the countershaft in. So I put a bit of grease on that surface. And that's just to hold this thing in position. It goes dimple side up. That little push goes into the notch at the top, like so. There we go. So I've got the cluster gears in, that shim's in, and I've pushed the old lay shaft up just to hold all this steady in a line. And then we need to fit the new upper bearing. So this goes with the dimple side facing the cluster gears. That side goes to that little notch. And hopefully it'll just fit in here. Alright, well, I think we got it this time. I pulled it back out, and I found that one of the bearings in the lay shaft was sticking up 4 or 5 thousandths above the surface of the end of the gear. So there's the washer. So that goes in like that. Look at that. You see, it's just sliding in nice and easy. The next thing to do is going to be to put the main shaft in here. What we're going to have to pull the counter shaft out again. The lay shaft goes in, but it won't lay down with the gear all the way up, because the gears will be trying to mesh at a funny angle. So what we'll do is take the main shaft, and we'll bring it in like this at an angle through. And of course the input shaft will be off of it again. you can't lay it down because the gears will be trying to mesh and they'll be at a funny angle, which means they'll have to pull the lay shaft back out to let that drop down. But it's kind of nice just to have it there to know that it fits. We never would have known about that bearing if we hadn't pre-fitted it. And then when the main shaft's down here, we need to put the new bearing on because the bearing won't fit through this hole because you're coming through at an angle, right? So the bearing's got to go from this side, and it's also pushed into the case a little bit, but it's also a fairly tight fit on the end of the main shaft in that it'll have to be pressed or something. Usually, because these transmissions are getting older, can usually use the soft mallet and drive it down. The big thing is that all the gears will want to be jumping apart on the main shaft, so it's a struggle. Anyway, we will try to do that. So let me get set up, and then we'll see where we are. So you need to get your reverse gear in before you put the main shaft in. There's not enough room to slide it in otherwise. And it goes gear forward, the notch for the engagement fork towards the tail shaft, and of course the shaft we took out originally. And make sure you get this into its fork because it's a real, you can, if it falls out, you can do it later, but it's difficult. Just support that. There's the lay shaft. That's that falling down. So again, make sure your gears are all closed up. Don't forget this spacer washer on the end. There's a spacer washer, goes one on either side of the bearing. There we go. Okay, so that's down. As you can see, that bearing has hit that edge now. So from here, we're going to have to push it. So I set up my workmate. These are the steel blocks out of the press with the cutouts in them. So I want to push on the inner edge of that bearing. And I'm going to balance the transmission case on here, and the gears are going to separate because I don't have enough hands to do anything different. So we'll have to push it a little bit, then put them back together. Let's see if this will go. Well, it went some, that's for sure. Alright, well, let's take a look. You can see the bearing pushed in quite a bit, and the gears are separated a little bit. Actually, not that bad, but it feels like that one's locked. Well, so we don't look too bad. Looks like the shaft didn't rotate when the gears fall down, so they just pushed back in where they were supposed to be. I'm doing this way out on the end of the table because in the middle there'd just be too much bounce. Wow, this is going better than I thought it would. So there's the bearings pushed all the way into the ring. That's that snap ring. Gears are on, the gears are still turning. So, wow, found something new. All right, well, let's put this back on the main bench and get the countershaft pulled back in. So the main shaft did go in with the reverse gear in place, and I've just pushed the countershaft up, and we got the new countershaft. Push the countershaft cluster up. Yeah, it's not quite aligned. You just got to kind of look down the hole and push everything till it lines up. Okay. Well, now we need to put the input shaft in. So you want to put your synchronizer ring in. Make sure it's with the, and it just goes in through this side. Well, I forgot. The synchronizer teeth are bigger than the gear, so we need to put this on before we put the lay shaft in. Oh well, drop that back out and try again. So just a couple of quick notes. You notice that there is a port here, and there's a notch in the gasket. You see that notch right there, and that's so that both sides of this bearing get lubed, and it sits in a little puddle of lube, I suppose, to some degree. And don't forget to grease your seal so it doesn't run dry on the shaft when you first start this up. So I found an interesting thing. This is the replacement tab to lock the shafts in. And you'll notice how high this bolt is sticking out, and that's because they just barely counterbore it, which means there's a lot more meat right here, and this is where the other ones break. So I'm thinking I might just go ahead and use that, compounded by the fact that this end plate, this is where that shaft goes, so the end plate will hold it in place as well. So seems like a pretty easy bet. There's hardly any pressure on this shaft, so not much to worry about there. Anyway, so that's what I'm going to do. So it's just a matter of I've got to get the gasket in here, and then the bolt and safety wire. So if you look at these screws, you'll see there's a hole drilled through the head, and that's so you can pin them with safety wire, and of course we're going to Loctite them as well. So I think there's 6 of these. And of course we want to use a star pattern on this, and you're not pulling down all the way tight on the very first turn. And then we need to safety wire them. So you want to feed the wire through the loop, or the hole in the head. Try not to tie it into a knot. And get the 2 ends even. And then you want to give it a few twists. You want to make sure that you're just, when you twist this, that it's making a spiral and it's not just tightening the end. So there's the first one. And then we'll take this, feed it through the next bolt. get through there, get a couple of twists just short of the next head. Feed that through. Try not to tie a knot in the wire. After it's through, a couple more twists on it. Figure out where the next bolt's going to be. Alright, so here's the little cover plate for the end of the counter shaft. New gaskets, new copper washer for the to seal it, and of course the obligatory Loctite. That just goes in here. It's pretty straightforward. Well, there it is, just set in. Works better when you have the ratchet going in the proper direction. Run it in until it's snug. The Loctite's going to do two things for us. It's going to, one, help these bolts not unwind, but it will also help to seal the threads so there's less chance of transmission oil coming through here. Well, so that's our transmission back together. I'm going to do the top cover separately. This is the reverse idler. That's working. We can see. Yes. So you can see we can turn the input or the output shaft. We can turn the input shaft. If I had three hands, I could show you that we can hold the input shaft and turn the output shaft because it's in neutral, but I only have two hands, unfortunately. So I think we're in good shape. And you'll notice that these margins are equal here. They're equal there where the synchros are, because this hub you can put in backwards, and then I'm not sure it'll go together like that, but if it did, it wouldn't shift right. Anyway, so the top cover, we're going to look at it because there's some oil seals in the sliders, and sometimes you can get them apart, sometimes you can't. You know, years ago we never used to bother with the O-ring seals, but you know, they're 50, 60 years old now, so, and this transmission's been sitting a long time, so they may have dried out. The new cross shaft for the clutch came in, so I'll make another video of that because I want to show you how to modify the shifter fork. This is an original shifter fork, and we have a replacement shifter fork from TRF, and the nice thing is it still has this boss on it, so that's good. So I'll show you why that's important, and then we'll do a separate video on the overdrive, because this video is getting long enough. So I hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Comments are very important, and subscriptions are important too, so please don't forget. And we will see you next time. It's getting hot, so I think I'm going to pack this up and go on inside, and maybe I can start editing. See ya.